Good afternoon, honorable members. The sitting is resumed. Members, when the suspension was taken, we were on government business. And with that, we shall continue.
Order number
Yes?
23, sir.
Number
23.
23.
In the name of the Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs, to move the second reading of the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018.
Yes, honorable minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. This matter dates back to 2013, when, as you know, there were a series of measures which the government was forced to put in place to address a number of economic challenges which we had, but also as part of the reform process for the tax administration of Barbados. One of the issues that arose in the early part of this administration's life, which is a hangover from the previous administration, was the issue pertaining to the reverse tax credit and how it was being dealt with and administered. By way of history, the reverse tax credit, Mr. Speaker, sir, was introduced by the last administration as part of the recommendations arising from the implementation of the value-added tax and the pernicious impact which that tax was expected to and eventually did have on ordinary Barbadians, particularly those who work below a particular income threshold. As you know, in the Barbados tax system, particularly where income tax is concerned, the first $25,000, it's really $24,500, but we round it off at $25,000, is considered to be tax-free. That's the basic claimable allowable amount claimed under the Income Tax Act. It means that anybody who earns a salary annually below that amount is not required to pay income tax. That was developed over a number of years. I believe it began with under the Democratic Labour Party, when the then Minister of Finance, the then Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central, in collaboration with his cabinet colleagues, the late Dr. Haynes, introduced that measure in 1980. South Central, did I say? St. Michael South Central. Then the 15,000 tax-free proposal, which was then codified into law. And subsequent to that, administrations had increased that amount till it got up to the 25,000. So that's the basic allowable deduction in the tax code, income tax code for individual taxpayers. And when the value-added tax was introduced nearly a decade later, just over a decade later, it was felt that given the potential pernicious nature of the tax, given that it was an indirect tax and tended to fall or would tend to fall disproportionately on low-income earners because of the pervasiveness of the tax, that is, that it applied not only to goods but to services as well, that certain mitigating measures needed to be introduced to allow for those persons below a certain income threshold to be able to navigate and cope with the impact of the value-added tax. And so the reverse tax credit was one of those interventions. Another one, of course, was the VAT basket of exempt goods and goods. But the reverse tax credit was one of those that was introduced. And it started at, I believe, $750. It increased. It was increased by this administration coming into the when we came into office in 2008-9, we accelerated that increase. The intention was by the previous government to take it to 1,300, but they didn't do so. But we felt, given the circumstances of the crisis that was facing the global economy and the impact which it was having negatively on our own economy, that it was important for us to hold the hands of Barbadians and to allow them the additional resources to be able to cope not just with VAT but with some of the other things that would have been introduced. Now, of course, no one, as we know now and accept, expected or indeed could predict how long this recessionary condition would continue. And by 2013, the debilitating impacts or effects of that global recession on Barbados, particularly on our main foreign exchange earning sectors of tourism and financial services, international business, and percolating its way down to the non-traded sectors in particular, it became necessary in the circumstances to relook the increase which we had done relative to the reverse tax credit from 750 to 1,350 1,300, sorry, Barbados dollars. Now, the other point in relation to that, Mr. Speaker, sir, was that administratively, we discovered by way of investigation and through to the tax reform process study that we had done in conjunction with the Fiscal Affairs Department of the International Monetary Fund through CARTAC, the regional technical body, that the administration of the reverse tax credit was tending to have some very serious problems. In fact, even though it was budgeted in one financial year for the reverse tax credit to expend or to take up a revenue about $25 million, it rose to almost $40 million in that year. I believe it was 2012, either 2011 or 2012. And one of the major complaints of the administrators is that there was such a flood of claims, not necessarily consistent with what was happening in the economy by way of fallout, but that there were situations where it could be proven concretely that there were double claims, leading, of course, to situations where there was a suspicion of possible collusion or at least inattentiveness. Let me put it that way, because I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody, but inattentiveness in relation to how these things were being dealt with. And each year since its introduction, there was a tremendous percentage increase, both in the number of persons and also in the amount of resources that had to be clawed back because of the refund and the credit. And it was felt that at least the administration of it needed to be a lot clearer, a lot more clinical, and far more efficient. And the government took the opportunity, whilst it introduced some austerity measures in 2013, to pull back the reverse tax credit from the $1,300 back to the $650, sorry, half of that, and to take the opportunity as we transition from the old Inland Revenue Department into the Barbados Revenue Authority to have it, the process by which it was administered, by which the credits were processed and paid out, to have those adjusted in a way to allow for better administration, cleaner, more transparent administration of the system. And we felt in the circumstances, we always said it was going to be a temporary measure. We said that we were going to find a way, once there was improvement in the economy and revenues increase, that we would try to put it back to where it was. Those circumstances have come about, not substantially, because we are not growing as fast or at the rate that we are satisfied with yet. And the revenues, yes, have increased year on year for the last 2-3 years, but they themselves are not at the extent to which we know they can go, but there has been improvement. In the meantime, however, there have also been additional taxes that we have had to put on. The most impactful, of course, being the reverse tax, being the National Social Responsibility Levy. And whilst we do have carve-outs for that in terms of the VAT basket and it being limited to certain types of goods, and we've exempted drugs from the thing for the drug service and so forth and so on, we also felt that in the circumstances, it would not be an unuseful thing. Let's put it in a positive way. It would be a useful thing to have the reverse tax credit restored. As we had indicated, it would be, since the reduction was only intended to be temporary. Now, we are satisfied that the administrative arrangements are now in place to have a better monitoring of the process, and we are happy with that the Barbados Revenue Authority has been able to put those things in place. And when we sought their advice, they said that they believe they're confident that they can do so, and that their advice would be that the government should go ahead with its intention of restoring the reverse tax credit. Of course, for having those paid out. Now, the Revenue Authority and the Ministry of Finance, and of course, with the approval of the Cabinet, have approved for this to be done. It wasn't just done overnight. As some people would want to suggest, it's only being done because of the election. This was done many, many months ago. We're waiting on the paperwork to be completed. It is now completed. It is here. And we see absolutely no reason why it shouldn't be done. Of course, the reverse tax credit is paid on a per annum basis on an income year. And therefore, it becomes effective from income year 2017. And therefore, you can pay it would be effective income year 2018, because once we pass this legislation, income year 2017 will be the first year of assessment. And once, like now, once you do your filings come April, you can file for your income year 2017 and receive your reverse tax credit payments. And I think that those persons in the society who have been mal-affected by both VAT and the NSRL would welcome this opportunity to get a few more dollars in their hands, and I think that that's all for the good, and I see no reason why the government should pretend that there's an election coming and you don't want to do things because there's an election coming. You do things when they're ready to be done and because it is right to do them, and I think that that is what the circumstances are, and I see no reason why we should hold this in abeyance and let the income year change, the claiming period change, which would probably coincide with election whenever that is called, or just before an election, or whenever the process is. And I see no reason why we should make people wait an additional year to get the benefit which they can get right now. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Seconder? Yes, Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I listened to the Minister of Finance proposing to return the reverse tax credit to those who were most affected and offering an explanation as to why the reverse tax credit had been first reduced and then withdrawn completely in the first place. I want to say that it is an honorable approach to return this monies to those who are most marginal. But I believe that we need to be very honest with ourselves. Mr. Speaker, those who earn $25,000 or less annually are some of the most marginal and vulnerable members of our society. Usually they are single, women, and young. And sir, often they carry the entire responsibility of a family on their back. Without extensive or extended support from grandparents, aunts, and uncles, simply because the demographic of Barbados is changing. And so, for the most part, many of these individuals affected are stand-alone responders within their family. I want to make the point that even as we endured an austerity period, we need to understand that it cannot ever be a shared responsibility amongst the electorate. There are people who will always be able to withstand an austerity period more so than others. There are always people who have disposable income over and above that which is required for a basic living. Those of us who are educated, professional, recipients of generational wealth, or even entrepreneurs, where we are able to generate and create our own wealth independent on a salary from an external source or independent of a union representative arguing for an increase on our behalf. These are the people who can withstand an austerity program. But for others who are marginal, what they receive on a weekly or monthly basis is barely enough to cover what is considered their living wage. There are people in this country, sir, who are working for $200 a week. There are others who are working for even less than that. Because they work on a rotation basis, they may be given no more than 3 days a week. There are people in this country carrying home $175 a week, sir, after statutory deductions have been made. And out of that $175, out of that $200, they are still required to cover all of their living expenses. And let us not be dishonest. In the 21st century, in order to have a dignified existence, there are some living expenses that are simply not discretional. Having a decent shelter over your head is not discretional in the 21st century. I remembered in a previous administration when it was felt that all pit toilets should be eliminated. That was not an unreasonable proposal. It was an honorable initiative. But even today, there are some Barbadians who do not have the pleasure of a waterborne facility in their homes and are struggling to make these upgrades. There are others who are struggling with broken homes, struggling with renovations, struggling with having to put their children through school, especially in the face of now having to make a 20% contribution to tertiary education. But even before that, they're struggling with simple things like health care. And we note that people who somehow are marginal seem to have more health issues than others. What might be a simple medical intervention for some person of means can become calamitous or even critical to a person who does not have the means. A simple case of having a broken knee and not being able to get an MRI, for example, having to wait on the hospital, having the x-ray delayed month after month, and the condition worsening, for example. Even something as simple as having a defective stove in the house. When we look at house fires, for example, and you do a critical analysis of why we have house fires, many people have defective appliances that they just simply cannot replace. And whereas it may be easy for us to say, well, that person is irresponsible and they ought not to use it, and they ought to have replaced it, for a poor person to replace that appliance will cost more than it is for a person of means, simply because a person of means will go to a supplier and purchase it. They will take the cash out of their pocket and they will just purchase it. If they take it on credit, they may pay within the first 3 months and get a discount on it. But a poor person for that same appliance, sir, must take out a payment plan. And that payment plan will come with interest attached. And a stove that I may very well buy for $1,500, that same individual may eventually pay $1,800 or $2,000 for it. And I simply give that example to say that for marginal and socioeconomically vulnerable people, living for them is not a straightforward exercise. It is a challenge. And therefore, it was unfortunate that those who are marginal were actually caught up in this austerity program of ours, and that they literally were asked to carry this same shared responsibility, even though we did not call it by that name. But they carried the shared responsibility because they paid the increased VAT. VAT was increased from 15% to 17.5%. They paid that. They paid the 2% NSRL. And when that was not enough, they paid the 10% NSRL and all the attendant increases that went with that. And so their meager earnings were taxed more critically than those with a disposable income. It was unfortunate and it was unacceptable, sir, that this reverse tax credit was removed during the most difficult period for them. This reverse tax credit is now being returned. I am happy to see that. I will accept the minister's point that it is not an election gimmick, that there was a lot of paperwork that had to be done. And I am hoping that as a goodwill gesture, that we will return as best we can that which was lost to those who were marginal. He said that it would be applied to the income tax year 2018. But if it is that those who were marginal were not being asked to share in the austerity program, then I am hoping that your paperwork would afford you the opportunity to cover the years, the lost years, the years that were lost. Because in as much as we might say, well, it's not an entitlement, the fact is that those who were most marginal were disadvantaged as a result of not having it. A simple $1,300, that might be a week's pay for the honorable member, or that might be a visit to a restaurant on the West Coast, something that you might blow in a day or a week at the races, is a major investment for a marginal person. That $1,300 could put Barbadians' children through school at the beginning of the year. That $1,300 changing a new appliance. These are the little things that we take for granted but are significant to an individual who is of lesser means. So whilst, sir, I do not oppose this measure, in fact, I support this measure, I am saying that we need to look at the possibility of even taking it further and making sure that we make up for those lost years. If we don't do it in this year, it should be a credit where we do it in other years as our revenues increase and we are performing better economically. And so, sir, with these short words, I shall take my seat. Thank you.
Yes, the member for St. Michael West Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's very right to give a few brief comments in respect of the measure. I really want to thank the Finance Minister on this occasion because we do understand that the impact that it has had on those who are the most vulnerable. One of the things, of course, that we also appreciate at this point in time is the fact that, you know, those persons in our society who are at the, what we will say, at the lower end of the spectrum, sometimes when we have to, you know, they are caught up in the whole effort to move forward this economy. And sometimes, very often, yes, it seems as if they have to bear the brunt of it. And that is why sometimes we have, as we go forward, to teach our people the importance of priorities. Because if it is one thing, I believe that from this current scenario that we are going through, is the importance of, as a nation, recognizing that we must have some priorities in life. And remember that, you know, whatever it is, we have to prepare for eventualities. And of course, you know, sometimes that there are some that we cannot prepare ourselves for, but the best that we could, we have, as a people, to prepare each other for these eventualities, and at the same time, too, hold hands with each other when it comes to the question of preparing each other for the sacrifices that need to be made. Of course, one of the sad things really sometimes it seems is that very often it is even those sometimes who are at the top who cry the hardest and the loudest when sacrifices have to be made, because sometimes they seem to think that, you know, they're being asked to give up so much more. While on the other hand, those at the bottom, they seem to think that, you know, at the same time not recognizing that those at the bottom of the ladder, sometimes they were giving up that much more. And I think really that it is incumbent upon us to ensure that we have as much balance as possible in terms of trying to ensure that in the programs that we develop, that those persons who are most vulnerable in our society are adequately protected. That is why we have to give credit to the government anyhow, that at least it put in place the social safety nets that ensured that those areas of government assistance which specifically targeted the vulnerable, that those areas were not compromised at the same time. Because while we recognize that, yes, some areas had to be sacrificed, there were other areas, of course, where we spoke to the fact that if somebody is dropping through the crack, that will hold them up or prevent them from dropping through the crack, that in itself was not sacrificed. And that is why, for instance, our social welfare services became extremely critical at this particular point in time. We also have to, and also besides that, there were other services that, for instance, despite the fact that there were some people who were thinking that, you know, it is time for us to get rid of them, we still continued at the same time in the face of the fact that there were people out there who were saying we should get rid of them, and that we were treating Barbadians too well. If the other people were telling us that you know, we should not give free bus fares, we should not give, for instance, even they were attacking, in some cases, the school meals that we give to our children. All of these things that they were attacking, that actually benefited those sections of our society who basically could have been endangered if they were removed. And I really, in this situation, I think we have to compliment the fact that we at least arrived at a balance that ensured that there were still some services that were maintained by government, that basically prevented those persons from dropping through the cracks. The other point too, Mr. Speaker, I wish to make, that, you know, we all have to admit that it also taught us that we need to adjust our lifestyles during this particular period too. Because, you know, it is very difficult that to understand sometimes, even in our own homes, that we do not, again, as I said in my initial stages, prepare ourselves for eventualities. And the whole question, you know, I read clearly that you keep on hearing that financial institutions are showing a large amount of savings. The question that you have to ask generally is that to whom do those savings belong? Because clearly, when you look at it, those persons who are in the low-wage earning categories, it seems not to belong to them. And it seems to me, to my mind, that what is happening sometimes that we have to be careful in our societies that we are seeing today is that you are seeing the aggregation of money in the hands of a few. And that in itself means that the general resources of our country, they are not being as evenly distributed as they were in the past. And that is an issue, sir, that we have to be very careful, because what it means is happening is that the money in whose hands now it is aggregated, they are not investing as much in the society as they should. And those persons actually, because, you know, you walk around and you talk to people, and you find that a lot of these people in the low-wage earning categories have excellent ideas in terms of investment. But for the fact that sometimes they are unable to walk into a bank and find the necessary level of support in a banking institution that will help to finance those things. And in that particular period, you needed that kind of effort where you can support people with innovative ideas. I also don't want to compliment the government, if any point of view, that there were some attempts in terms of through the state institutions such as the Enterprise Growth Fund and Fund Access to help. But we also needed a greater effort of mobilization in our society that helped those persons who had those creative ideas, who basically would have been, in some ways, at a disadvantage, to be able to carry forward those innovative ideas and bring them into the normal business environment that we would like to see. And these are the things, basically, that we need to refer to, that we need to speak about. And I think, sir, that in that regard, we therefore need to recognize that as we go forward into the future, that we are able to provide our people with the necessary skills that helps them to basically deal with these difficult times, and also to have the correct tools to be able to help them to be able to survive them too at the same time, and to provide them the kind of opportunities that, of course, will be able to help them to create at least a better living for the family. Because one of the things, of course, that we want to do is to also help them to be independent in terms of, you know, we always talk about the fact that Aaron Barrow referred to the fact that, you know, instead of giving a man a fish, you teach him how to fish. And this is I think, in the new dispensation that we're going into, we have to continue the training programs that we have started in terms of helping those persons who basically do not have as much resources as us in our societies to be able to equip themselves through training and through programs designed for them to be able to survive these very difficult economic times. And with that, sir, I just want to say I do support the measure. Thank you very much, sir.
Obliged. Yes, Member for St. Lucie.
Mr. Speaker, I too support this because it is no doubt that there are a lot of people in Barbados who look forward to receiving the 1,300. And I just want you to know it's not a promise, it's an actual, and that reverse tax credit is used as a regulating factor. Because when we were switching from the direct to the indirect, it was felt that those persons who were paying direct, that those at the top were benefiting tremendously, and that the ones at the bottom were not benefiting. So in order to allow them to benefit, we had to introduce a reverse tax credit. But it is no doubt that the reverse tax credit can be an economic tool where the Minister of Finance can use, instead of getting various concessions and so on, it allows the Minister of Finance to extract the full amount of taxes, and as people make requests of him, he is able to give a reverse tax credit to whatever sector or whatever cause. So I think that as we watch where the world is going, you're going to see a heavy demand for reverse tax credits, where people, when they recognize that our economic fortune will be better served if we continue to make the shift away from direct taxation to indirect taxation. It is no doubt that direct taxation favors external forces and indirect taxation favors the local forces. And that is, when you have direct taxation, you tend to punish your workers and your investors, whereas when you have indirect, you tend to move away from punishing your workers and your investors, and you give an advantage to your local workers, an advantage. And I remember when VAT was first introduced, it made the point that we were making our goods more expensive and that we were making the imported goods cheaper, which, when you look and see what has occurred, it is quite clear that it also had an effect on the foreign reserves, because instead of encouraging persons to produce, we were encouraging persons to consume imported goods by reducing the cost of the goods to the persons who were importing and disadvantaging those who were producing. There was a time in this country, sir, when every distributor, every merchant was part of the manufacturing sector. And if one were to do an analysis, one would have recognized that from the time VAT was introduced, that the manufacturing sector declined. So we have to be very careful. We have to continue to do an analysis of the impact of direct versus indirect. But I want to make the point over and over again that direct is for the external manufacturers, indirect is for the local manufacturers. And we need to do that careful analysis, and we need to recognize that we need to reward our workers and producers and punish our consumers. And a good example of this is how this government has been able to do it in the tourism sector, where we were able to reward the workers and the investors within the tourism sector and punish the external forces. And we need to do more, because I keep making the point, in order for this economy to get the growth it needs, it is important that you encourage people to produce. And you can only encourage people to produce if you have the labor or if you have the necessary investments to help with that production. And as I said over the weekend, I look forward to the day where we might have to ignore the macro approach to agriculture and recognize that we have to look at the micro, because in visiting AgriFest, it is quite clear that the young people of Barbados, something I've been saying for a long time, are very much interested in agriculture. And if the young people of Barbados are interested in agriculture, then we must provide the opportunities. And that is why I strongly support an organization like the RDC, recognizing the amount of land that is available or used to be available through the small farmers of Barbados, and recognize the amount that used to be planted in sugarcane that are now not being planted, and enter into an arrangement for those small farmers to lease the land to government, to hand it to the guys on the block and the young people of Barbados. Because the more people we get producing, the more our growth will be. I was very impressed this weekend, sir, when I saw the number of young people and the quality of the black belly sheep. It is no doubt that we are on a niche in this country and we need to build on it. Because some of those black belly sheep look like young cows. Yes, you would not believe. When you look at them, you could easily have mistaken them for a calf. No, seriously, don't me ask the coordinator. And I'm very impressed where we have been able to move that sector. And I think that it can only get better when we increase the production. Another thing, Mr. Speaker, I heard a lot of talk about predatory larceny and so on, and I want you to know that I support the legislation. But one of the reasons why it seems so impactful, it is because when we were growing up, everybody produced. And there's no doubt that what we now complain about was a habit. I mean, breaking cane and so on, that was a habit. But the impact was not so significant because when you did a percentage of the number of canes that were used over the production, it was not significant. But if you now do the same formula, you'll be shocked to see that the percentage is significant. Not that the farmers are breaking more canes, but it's just because that the production is lower. So what we need to do is encourage those guys who might be breaking cane and those who feel like they have a right to break people's cane and sell them, to go and produce their own and allow them the opportunity to have some land to work and to grow their own canes. Yeah, and I want to compliment a civil servant who, in my opinion, came up with a beautiful idea when he suggested that what we should allow in Barbados, instead of complaining about the vacant lots, that the people who own the vacant lots also come on board and allow people to work the vacant lots for them and keep the lots clean while at the same time planting a crop to sell. Which means that the owner of the land would not have to worry about the Ministry of Health, he would not have to worry about the environment, but he would be able to get someone to clean his land for him, while at the same time, the person working and keeping his land clean will be able to get compensation based on the crops that they are producing. And I think it's a wonderful idea because it allows me to put an argument to the Minister of Finance that if this occurs, we would not be able to pressure the Minister of Finance for so many persons demanding the reverse tax credit. And I know some persons were asking, where am I going? And that's exactly where we went. To demonstrate that the more people you have employed and the more opportunity you create for them, the less persons will ask for a demand, make a demand for the reverse tax credit. So it shows that there's a relationship between production and the request for social amenities. And that the more you allow a person to produce, the least demand he will make on you. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I want to support the Minister for demonstrating that the economy has now reversed all of those hidden expenditure that were left by the Barbados Labour Party when they were able to use the cash basis and hide the expenditure and left the accrual basis for us where we had to pick up the expenditure and allow our revenue not to match our expenditure, but allow us to have a bigger loss than we should. Because I have argued and will continue to argue that based on what we did, if we were to ignore the expenditure left to us by the Barbados Labour Party, and we were to judge ourselves based on the revenue and expenditure, we would have been running as what the economists call a surplus, but what I will call as a profit. But because we had to pick up the expenditure, and we allow ourselves to be bogged down in deficits and so on, it appeared that we were not managing well. But Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you, the only reason why it looks like we were not managing well, it was because of the large hidden expenditure left by the other guys on the other side. And that is why they can't be here today, because they understand. And that's why I want to thank the leader of the opposition from UPP for being willing enough to come in here and face us and not run away from the facts. So, the reverse tax credit I support, but I just want to make the point that we did well, but we had to cover the hidden expenditure. It is now out of the way, and we are ready to sail, sir. I thank you.
I'm obliged. Yes?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I want to, in pushing through this measure and bringing it to a close, to thank both honorable members who spoke. Of course, the leader of government business for the United Progressive Party, who spoke in relation to this matter and made some very useful points. I think that I hear her empathy, and I respect and understand that. Indeed, I share it. You know, taxation is never an easy thing to do, to impose. I don't know anybody who really likes to have additional taxes and or other liabilities, statutory liabilities imposed on them. And therefore, you know, it is never an easy thing when government has to do it. But I always like to look at these things holistically. It is not just a case of a tax grab. Government, you know, is looking around to see what other activities it can make an imposition on. It really is about what we as a society are trying to protect. The fact of the matter is that it has become exceedingly more expensive and costly to afford the type of standard and quality of living that we have become accustomed to in Barbados. These are just the realities. And in some instances, governments have to make choices as to whether or not some of these things you will adumbrate in their flow to the extent where the very people that you hear cry out legitimately about the level of taxation and the burden and hardship which it places on people's pockets because it goes directly at their disposable income. The question is whether or not doing an alternative action may not actually put those persons in a worse position than it would be were it not for the tax itself. And I also believe that taxation is not something that is permanent, in a state of permanency, that it cannot be altered once conditions become better. We always say, and I know the member for St. Peter, who is not here now, the Red Arm member, always makes the point that adjustment has to be a shared experience. I agree with that. It has to be a shared experience. And as much as we try, and as hard as we try to shield those most vulnerable in our community from such adjustments, and I think we've done a reasonably good job, even though the pervasiveness of economic adjustments tend to percolate their way down and touch some people, I think that we cannot guarantee in every instance of adjustment, in every recessionary condition, that you're going to be able to shield everybody from the impact of those adjustments, particularly as they relate to taxation and the raising of revenue. And I also make the point, I mean, what is the revenue going to? By and large, the revenue is going to support those social services that keep the society together. The health, the education, the public transport, the sanitation, school meals. These are basic things that have defined Barbados. And my own thing is, it is better to extract a little 5 cents more, or $1 more, or $2 more, or $10 more, depending on the level of income, from a member of the society, and ensure that those who are most vulnerable in our community continue to be provided with those things that will at least give them a chance to be able to get an education, to stay relatively healthy, to grow to an age of majority, and to get themselves a job or make themselves competitive to get a job, to earn an income, to be able to contribute to their families, than to say, I want to have an entirely low tax environment. We're not going to raise this tax, we're not going to raise that tax, but we are going to cut those services and imperil the condition of those whom we know can least afford to have it in peril. And that's really the real life choice of government. And nobody, government, opposition, spokesman, activists, whatever they want to call themselves, there is none of them, none among them, who can stand up and tell you at this moment that they are going to be able to do anything differently and do it with a straight face, because nobody is going to believe them, because they just cannot do it. And I'm saying that not in response to what the member for Christchurch West Central has said. I mean, Christchurch West has said, she shares a boundary with you. What the member for Christchurch West has said, but in relation to what we hear being propagated on a daily basis in Barbados. That life is hard and difficult, and the government has imposed all these taxes, and we can't wait for X to get in government, as though X is going to be able to cut every tax and still provide every service commonly provided to Barbadians. It simply is not going to happen, and anybody who believes that that is the case, I keep telling them they better check the recent history of what we know has happened in some countries, not just in the Caribbean, but further afield. Because to give people that is to give them fool's gold and a belief. For example, where you hear people saying, oh, we are going to eliminate the NSRL, and we are going to put back VAT to 15%, and we are going to restore university tuition fees for students, and we are going to do this, and we are going to give the public servants a massive increase in salary, and we are going to do all of that. And nobody stops to ask them the question, well, how are you going to do all this? How are you going to do it? Where are the resources going to come from? How are you going to bring fiscal discipline and reduce the deficit and consolidate the public accounts when you are going to start off by wrecking them? That is the real question that has to be asked and answered in the next few weeks. And we have to have a frank discussion with people and say to them, look, the condition is improving, but it is not at the stage yet where such false heroics and bogus promises can be made to people just because you want to garner popular support. It simply is not going to happen. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's no opposition here today, because there's nothing for them to say. That's why they've said they're not coming back, because there's nothing for them to present to the Parliament. There's no plan. There has never been any plan, except scandal and gossip and rumor and talk about corruption. I often says that, you know, I really wonder if it is possible for the devil to frown and sing. So I wait. We wait to hear all of it, as we ourselves will present some of it. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, sir, at the end of the day, Barbados has to run. And it is run off of the resources which we make, that we earn through our productivity, which we need to increase, the taxes which we levy on people, the grant funding, small bit that we may get for one or two activities, but ostensibly on the blood, sweat, and tears of every single Barbadian citizen. It is not done through any manifesto. It is not done through any charter of discontent and confusion. It is not done through any dry talk in the night. It is done on the basic realities. X costs Y, and you have to find Y in order to provide X. That is the basic algebra of it. And none of the old talk is going to help any Barbadian out there achieve any better state in condition if things are not fixed. If there's no money in the treasury, drugs can't buy at the hospital. If there's no money in the treasury, buses can't run on the road. If there's no money in the treasury, there can be more potholes than you have now. If there's no money in the treasury, the students are not going to be able to go to university. If there's no money in the treasury, you can't provide social welfare for those who may have fallen through the cracks and require welfare services. If there's no money in the treasury, there can be no community development, no culture, no youth development, no law and order, no national security. It requires money, Mr. Speaker, sir, in order to do these things. And there can be no money in an economy if you try to give people the impression that you can waive every tax, remove every imposition, lower every tax, and give people the impression that you can have in Barbadian society a set of services being provided free of cost at point of delivery or heavily subsidized by the state beyond what they really cost, as we call it, a Scandinavian economy, a Scandinavian society with an American-type economy. It can't work. It simply can't work. There's a reason why some taxes in the United States are low. They're low because the people who benefit from the services got to pay for them when they go for them. So the government have to pay for them. They got to pull their pocket. They got to have health insurance. They have to pull a credit card to get the services. There's a reason why taxes are high in Scandinavia, in the Scandinavian economies, in Sweden and Switzerland and those types of Norway, those types of economies. There's a reason why they're high. Why income tax is almost being taxed at a rate of 40%. There's a reason why that is, because they get practically everything free of cost at point of delivery. But they have to pay for it. So we in Barbados have to decide what we want. We want the Western American way, where rates are low and you drive them down, but you pay for the services at point of delivery. So when you got the QEH, you pull your credit card or you pull your pocketbook and pay before anybody hooks up anything to you or gives you any examination or give you any review or offers an opinion. You pay, you go down to accounts first, even before you go in and register as a patient to go down at accounts. Or you want to be able to go down there and get those services free of cost at point of delivery, but pay a little bit extra in your taxes. That's the choice. Not a false choice, it's a real choice for Barbadians. And so we will see which one people believe is the most efficacious in this type of developing society which we have. I know which one has gotten us where we have come from to where we are now. And I know the one that we will choose in the Democratic Labour Party, not just for ourselves, but promote to other Barbadians because we know it is the right thing to do. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, to the extent that things have improved such that we can restore this reverse tax credit, I commend this to the Honourable House of Assembly in the hope that the resources can be made available to those who need them most. And we thank all those persons who, as the member for Christchurch West indicated, may have had to bear a little bit more than they perhaps ought to have in the circumstances. We apologize for the inconvenience, and we are happy at this stage that we have been able to keep our word and to restore this tax credit from $650 to $1,300 Barbados.
Honourable members, the question is that this bill be read a second time. Honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Speaker, sir, I beg to move that your honour do now leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of the bill.
Honourable members, the question is that I now do leave the chair and the House resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
The House is in committee. Question that clause 1 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
I move so that clause 2 stand.
Question that clause 2 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Beg to move, sir, that you do now report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
Question is, I do not report to His Honour the Speaker the passage of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Yes, honourable members, the sitting is resumed. Members, your chairman of committees has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move this bill be read a third time.
Honourable members, the question is that this bill be read a third time. Honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Income Tax Amendment Act 2018.
Honourable members, the question is that this bill be not passed and so cited. Honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Accordingly, this bill has been passed and so cited.
So the question may change. You go ahead then. Order number 22, sir.
Yes.
In the name of the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs, to move the second reading of the Value Added Tax Amendment Bill 2018. You were right.
Yes,
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. This is a bit of housekeeping relative to a budgetary measure which we had announced back in 2014, actually. We had indicated as part of the effort to get our local tourism participants to bring more of the foreign exchange on the island, or keep more of it on the island, certainly declare it so that we can have a better idea of how the flows are going, what is being recorded in the system, and to ensure that we encourage those members in our tourism industry to contribute more handsomely to the tourism, not just the tourism product, but the earning of foreign exchange in Barbados. And one of the measures that we delineated was that we were going to allow members to benefit from concessions under the Value Added Tax Act, particularly those persons who operated in the provision of what they call tourism-related services, direct tourism services, as the trade calls them. Those persons who would be in restaurants, do the jet skis, the other things that persons would normally enjoy who visit the island. And one of the things that we delineated would be necessary is that for those persons to get the concessional benefit of having the value-added tax on direct tourism services reduced from the standard rate of 17.5% to 7.5%, that they would have to indicate that through their annual filings with the Barbados Revenue Authority, that they were depositing or keeping on shore, depositing with the commercial banks 75% of the foreign exchange earnings that they made. Now, many of the operators said whilst they were keen to participate in that scheme and actually were trying to do so to the best of their ability, recognize that one of the challenges they faced was that most of what was happening with tourists, particularly in the system in this modern technological age, was that they were paying through credit cards as opposed to paying cash. There are still those who come on board and go to a teller machine or maybe to a financial institution or even travel on their own with small amounts of cash, but the bulk of the payments were being done by credit card. And even though you would tender a credit card for payment, say in a restaurant or otherwise, an arrangement to go on a tour or site visit with a tour company or whatever the case may be, even though that would be an international credit card, when it was done at point of sale with the point of sale machine for that card, it would be recorded in Barbados dollars as opposed to in US dollars, so to speak. And then it became a little difficult for the entity to be able to, in a timely and efficient and effective manner, register how much the sale would be in US dollars or in a foreign currency. And that presented a challenge to some, because what they then could only declare punctiliously was that cash which they would get and that they would take to the bank and redeem at the local commercial banks. The Barbados Revenue Authority was consulted, and it too did its own consultation with the financial institutions, particularly the commercial banks, who confirmed that that really is a major challenge. And in addition to that, that they did not keep the records in such a way as per each individual person who would have come in, direct tourism provider who would have come in to do such a transaction in such a way as to be able to break it out, disaggregate it, that you could say X provider brought in this amount of foreign exchange, Y provider brought in X amount of foreign exchange, and therefore they have reached the threshold of the 75%. So in that instance, we found that quite a number of the players in the industry, because a lot of them are actually small players, fell below the threshold of the 75%, and therefore were not able to access the concession as we had intended it. Both sides, or all sides, sat down and went through the process, and they came up with the arrangement that what we would do is to ensure that we capture them in the net of approved providers of direct tourism services, because one of the problems with recording that we discovered previous to this measure was that a lot of those providers actually operating outside of the system were not really registered with the BHTA, were not registered with the, as it is now, the Barbados Tourism Product Authority. Therefore, we knew that they were there, but we never knew what type of, how much business they were doing, and to what value, and so forth and so on. And after several meetings with the head of with the leadership of the BHTA and others in the industry, from the ministry and from the Barbados Revenue Authority and the value-added tax people in particular, it was felt that by recommendation from the Barbados Revenue Authority that an adjustment should be made to the proposal and indeed to the act to ensure that Section 2A of the fourth schedule of the act would be deleted to replace it with text stating that the entity must have a license issued by the Barbados Tourism Product Authority under Section 26 of the Barbados Tourism Product Authority Act 2014, so as to make it eligible in order to access the reduced or the subpar VAT rate. The BRA also took the opportunity to further point out that Section 26(2) of the said Act, the BTPA Act, requires that the applicant be current with their statutory obligations. In other words, they must not have any outstanding tax payable if you want to get the VAT concession at the subpar rate, at the sub rate as we call it, of 7.5%. You must be current with all your taxes and all your liabilities to the state, and as under Section 2B of the fourth schedule of the said Value Added Tax Act. And by doing so, it would allow you to access that concession rate. Now, the CPC, in drafting, made sure to mention to all the parties concerned that under the Tourism Development Act, the term tourism development status does not necessarily exist specifically, even though it was understood that that is the intention, but the word Barbados tourism development product be used as an alternative, because that is the term most commonly used in the existing legislation. We took that to heart and acted on it, because you have actually what is provided as a Barbados tourism product, and we thought that even though we were speaking about services, that we could bring that under that heading, and that was accepted, and the legislation was drafted. So again, we see no reason to deny people if they're prepared to follow the rules governing how this will be accessed. And again, in the context of what we've done for tourism, this is yet another benefit that we've given to an industry that has received so many. Of course, sometimes when you hear some people, you wouldn't think that we have done all of this. But I can say without fear of contradiction, perhaps no other government in modern history has done more by way of incentivizing all aspects of tourism, big, small, in between, the rich, the poor, everybody. We are seeing some significant benefits from it in the system. Long may that continue. We still have a lot of work to do, as the Minister of Tourism will tell you, but we are pushing ahead. We are seeing the gains. The tourism sector in Barbados has long turned the corner. It is really performing, and as we zone in on getting those resources from the visitors who come, this is one of the things that will assist in that particular regard. And so I want to commend this particular amendment to the House and beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Yes, sir.
I beg to second the bill, and in doing so will be quite brief in supporting this bill. As the minister indicated, since the decision was made that tourism would benefit from this reduced VAT levels, the threshold of 75% of your foreign exchange earnings has been a sore point. And I think, therefore, it is only fitting that I should stand on behalf of the sector to thank the Ministry of Finance and the officials for responding, and as the minister said, yet again adding another concession to the whole suite that the sector involves, that the sector enjoys. And I think we have to say that the government, we took a decision that we would try to see as much as possible how many of the imposts we could remove from the inputs to the sector in order to make it internationally competitive. And not that it would be tax-free, but that whatever tax revenue we enjoy from the sector should come from the outputs and not the inputs. And that way it would be internationally competitive. So this is very much in keeping with that philosophy, and we once again, you know, will say to the tourism sector, to whom much is given, much is expected. And I know for a fact that, you know, there were some genuine cases insofar as not being able to work out exactly what the threshold was, and in some cases you had some genuine tourism players who happened to also enjoy strong local business. So should they be punished for that reason? There's a very popular restaurant on the South Coast, for example. I don't think I would call the name of it, give them any free advertising, but they have a strong local trade as well, especially for business lunches and the like. So obviously they would, lots of tourists, you go there any night, but clearly the threshold would have been a problem in that case. I, however, remember some players saying that they could not calculate the foreign exchange component, and I, of course, didn't necessarily support them in that regard, but I understand, again, that, you know, there are some difficulties in some cases, and the point is that the government has responded in a time when we all need tax revenue. We are, again, prepared to concede one more time. Now, I am well aware that the tourism players will tell you, quietly, if not publicly, that, you know, bookings are extremely strong. The winter has been extremely good. You've had occasions when literally every single hotel room in Barbados has been booked, and the rates have been very good. We also, for the first time, have close to 1,000 rooms either recently completed or under construction. We've never had that level of new room stock in the works in Barbados. And that, again, has to do with this environment that we have created with respect to allowing investment to come into a sector that has been so heavily incentivized. I always make the point as well, when we talk about the new investment coming in, that we should talk about the existing players. And when we hear the statistics from the BHTA, that as many as 44 of their members, that's the number I heard, but I believe it's more than that by now, have done major work in upgrading their plant. That says that we are going in the right direction. And it's also quite rewarding, Mr. Speaker, to see when the international community or peers from the region and beyond also take note of what we are doing. In my presentation during the estimates, I was able to speak about the various awards, whether Caribbean Journal, TripAdvisor, the different agencies that have singled us out for special mention. But here it is, only today I received word that Norstat, the very prestigious research company working with DP2 Research, they have the only travel tracking dashboard. You have a lot of surveys regarding hotels and accommodation and the like, but not a single one that takes an overall approach to combining all the factors that make a vacation destination popular or not. And if that sounds eerily familiar, you've heard me talking about our product and setting up an agency that deals with our product. So this tracking dashboard is everything at a glance. So they ask not only about accommodation, but there are 20 other categories they look at: infrastructure, service, restaurants, overall satisfaction, just to name a few. And in terms of the methodology that they use, they interviewed 25,000 tourists and business travelers from 24 different outbound markets, what we would call our source markets, but 24, and they evaluate 140 travel destination markets in depth and track their attractiveness over time. Well, to stay on top of that huge pile of data, this is where they have the Destination Satisfaction Index. And they have developed this DSI, as they call it. And as I say, having assessed interviewed 24,000 different tourists from 25,000 tourists from 24 different markets, going to 140 different travel destinations. The Travel Satisfaction Index, the Destination Satisfaction Index, I would ask you to take a wild guess which country won the Destination Satisfaction Index award for the entire world. Believe it or not, Barbados. Mr. Speaker. Beating out places like the Maldives, Abu Dhabi, Colombia, Seychelles, Belize, Oman, the Dutch Antilles, I believe they probably mean Aruba there, Bahamas, and others. This is what we have been able to accomplish. It's amazing that our tourists are, according to empirical work done by Norstat, a very prestigious company that deals with quantitative methods. According to them, they're satisfied here. But if you listen to some of our own people, even people in the tourism sector talk, you would really think that these people are not satisfied. And let me make it very clear that I will not encourage anyone in and or around the sector to rest upon any laurel in this regard. We have more work to do, and I think that is the point, but we have to recognize that we're going in the right direction. We have to be doing something right, Mr. Speaker. We have to be doing something right. That next week at ITB, Barbados will be receiving this award in the face of, as I say, 140 destinations from around the world. We're doing something right. And a large part of that has to do with the bold decisions that we have been taking at the level of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs in creating the environment for the investment to pour in and for the reinvestment to take place. And it is in that respect why I had to rise and say a few words on this particular amendment. And I will once again want to thank the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northwest and his team for what they're doing, and to encourage the tourism players to continue to grow from strength to strength. So I once again beg to second this amendment, and I'm obliged to you.
I'm obliged. Research, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I too would want to associate myself with supporting this particular amendment to the Income Tax Act, of course, to the benefit of very important players in the tourism sector. And I do so, Mr. Speaker, from the perspective of often reflecting what several persons who, upon hearing of some of the tremendous innovative work which is being done by the government, often would say to me, but why are we not talking more about these initiatives? And I believe that this reminds me of one such important effort by the government of Barbados that oftentimes, because perhaps of its technical nature, or perhaps we don't speak enough of these achievements, that it is important through this medium to underscore that this really is a very important aspect of our efforts at seeking to respond to the vital industry of tourism and, of course, the players in that sector who need to be oftentimes offered a cushion if we are to ensure that we get the kind of foreign exchange earnings from the vital tourism sector. In listening to the Honourable Minister of Finance, and in terms of the rationale, it is really important that I underscore some of the things that have been said in relation to what has happened in this particular area. I believe, because there's been quite a lot of discussion, and rightfully so, Mr. Speaker, in relation to what is necessary to protect, of course, the earning of foreign exchange in Barbados. We know that we've had to take corrective and defensive measures, even in the face of some very unjustified criticism from the members of the opposition in relation to our economic strategy in defending our foreign exchange earning capacity. We know in Barbados that, of course, the nature of our economy is such that we need to continue to earn foreign exchange because, by and large, our economy is a very small, open economy dependent in large measure on the earning of foreign exchange, which has got to be earned to exchange for many of the goods and services which are consumed in Barbados. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the vital tourism sector, when you analyze the performance of the sector, by and large, in order for the tourism sector to function effectively and efficiently, it really needs foreign exchange. And while it earns foreign exchange, many of the inputs in the tourism sector are really reliant on the availability of foreign exchange to purchase those goods and services. In fact, if we are not able to do that, then of course that imperils the performance of the tourism sector. What certainly came to my attention in reviewing this particular amendment and the history of it given by the Minister of Finance was the intent in the first place by the government, why it wanted to secure some commitment from the players in the tourism sector, particularly of those players, and the ministry referred to some of them, the restaurants, jet ski operators and so on, those persons who would, by their very activity in Barbados, exchange their services for foreign currency. But that measure, I'm sure, had to do with ensuring that we could put some kind of protective net over the availability of foreign exchange, and the minister did put the threshold, initial threshold of the retention or the deposit within the commercial banking sector with 75% of the foreign exchange earned from those sectors. And one needs to ask oneself, why was that particular measure necessary in the first place? And it was necessary, Mr. Speaker, because the government recognized the importance of taking protective action in relation to how we can retain foreign exchange and also account for foreign exchange. At a time when, of course, we certainly learned, and it was pointed out during the various debates in here, certainly the last two presentations of the financial statements and budget proposals, the concern in relation to the availability of foreign exchange earned by entities in Barbados and whether or not that foreign exchange was going into the commercial banking system. Because, of course, unless that foreign exchange was hitting the commercial banking system, you have then the whole issue of not being able to report accurately the earning of foreign exchange. And I want to say that this particular measure, particularly when one listens to members of the opposition critiquing the government on what it is doing to protect our level of foreign exchange and ensure that we could accurately account for it. This measure has got to be seen within the context of being a very tremendous effort, and certainly an innovative effort on the part of the Ministry of Finance, working with the Ministry of Tourism, to address what has been identified as a concern. And I stress this, Mr. Speaker, because we have to be able to say to the public of Barbados what we have been doing or what we are doing in relation to important matters that are brought into the public domain. And I solemnly believe that when persons hear this kind of measure being made by the government of Barbados, certainly they would never want to fall victim to what is now a politicization by the operatives in the Barbados Labour Party as to our presence in this House, because it's being put abroad that the government, of course, is dragging out his tenure in the House of Assembly, and that we have nothing to do in relation to the work that is required to be done for Barbados. Now, if one were to follow that logically, this particular measure does put the lie to that kind of political operationalization by the Barbados Labour Party. This is important work that has to be completed on behalf of the public of Barbados. And I would want to say even more, Mr. Speaker, that this government recognizes that there is work to be completed. And therefore, that is why we are here in the House. Obviously, the opposition has signaled their boycotting of the House. I hope that in boycotting the House, that they will also signal that they will surrender their paychecks back into the Treasury, because they're really not earning their keep. They have literally resigned from the House of Assembly, and they have determined that they are no longer members of Parliament. And I believe that, having said that, and they like to, run around Barbados, with this political charade. They did it in relation to the resumption of the 10%, which was branded about Barbados as being something that you should never do. So now that they have taken the stance of determining and telling the people of Barbados that they no longer have any purpose for this House, then I hope, and I'm calling on them to surrender their salaries that they'll be paid while they're no longer in this House. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, I will go further, because I want the public of Barbados to know that the latest disclosure by the members of the opposition that they no longer will be coming to the House is not new. We've heard that, and we've seen them walking out of the House on numerous occasions. They
walk up more often than they're walking?
Of course. So the fact that they have now, on this particular occasion, signaled in a press conference that they no longer plan to return to the House is really not news to anybody who's following the proceedings of the House. I count that this is probably about the umpteenth time, and it speaks to the characterization of the members of the opposition, because on each occasion that they have made a determination that they're not going to be in this House, it had to do with some decision or some debate that they did not agree with. So anything that they don't agree with, they want to storm out the House and go in the public domain and give the public the wrong impression, absolutely wrong impression as to why matters happen in this House. And it's a good thing that we have a House that does not necessarily utilize all of its powers and its prerogatives, because much of what has gone abroad has really been misstatements, false impressions. But in returning to this measure, Mr. Speaker, I wanted very much to speak to it, because I really think that both the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Tourism should be applauded for having not only initially brought a measure to deal with the whole question of the foreign exchange earnings in the tourism sector by the players in the sector, but then the government went to the second level, because we often accuse of not listening, of being a government that you come with a particular measure, and when you get feedback, it's been said by members of the opposition that we don't listen to that advice, and the only advice is our own. But given the presentation made by the Minister of Finance and the history in relation to this measure would have been part of the 2014 budgetary proposals to the House. No, what would have occurred is that there was feedback. Feedback came to the government in the form that, look, we understand what you are intending on doing, but we have some issues. We have some issues in relation to the fact that much of what we do is driven by credit card transactions. You have asked for the threshold, 75%, in order to be eligible, that you would place up to 75% of your foreign exchange earnings in the commercial bank. The commercial bank themselves have verified that when it comes to credit card transactions, it is really difficult to be able to do this. So then what does the government do? What does a caring and listening government do? In this case, the government decided to listen to the stakeholders. The government decided to consult with the banking sector. And then the government came up with a solution, which was based on consensus in relation to how to address this particular matter. And as the Minister of Finance indicated, they're settled then on of being able to get a verification and license issued by the BHTA verifying the eligibility for this particular tax break, this concession. And I wanted to break this down, Mr. Speaker, in the way that I did, because it speaks to what this government has been doing, but not necessarily speaking about it, not necessarily explaining in the way that I think people would know this is really what has been happening. And I want to say that this is really an example of, of a government working along with its stakeholders. I believe that this particular measure really is the output, the result, had to be the result of careful analysis to be able to say, how do we find a way to account for the foreign exchange being generated in those tourism value-added services, and in a way that we can properly account for it, and also to ensure retention of those foreign currencies in relation to what the earning of tourism has been. And now, Mr. Speaker, you'll be aware, because one of the things that we would have heard continuously coming from the opposition benches, each time the Minister of Tourism gets up in the House and reports to the House the performance of the sector, undoubtedly the sector has performed very, very, very outstandingly over a period of time, particularly in relation to the arrivals. Arrivals have consistently increased, but of course each time the Minister of Tourism gets up and reports on the increased arrivals, of course the opposition seeks to say, well, you know, the spend is down. You know, the recorded spend is down. Now, I would say that this particular measure, when you analyze it, certainly signals that you would have had a lot of spend happening in the tourism sector in relation to the exchange of foreign exchange for goods and services, particularly in relation to certain players. But the reporting of that, because the monies are not hitting the banking system, and therefore the under-reporting of those earnings. I believe that by presenting a concession of this kind, where in order to be able to get your VAT concession moving from 17.5% to 7.5%, and I hope that maybe we can someday get that particular concession for the entertainment sector, who've been asking for that for quite a while. But this is an inducement. We will exchange a concession from 70.5% to 7.5% for those players in the tourism sector. And all we are asking you to do is to work with us in placing in the banking system at least 75% of your foreign exchange earnings. And that, I believe, I hope that we can at some time report on the how this, and maybe the Minister of Finance will be able to tell us how this has worked in relation to reporting and accounting for that that spend, because really that is part of the tourism spend that we have been hearing, you know, is not up to par. But I believe that this is a good initiative. I think obviously it shows that there has been buying for it in the sector, and it shows that there has been an initiative and a response by the government to dealing with this particular matter. It underscores as well, Mr. Speaker, the fact that we are not just in the House for being in the House's sake. There are thousands of Barbadians, taxpayers, there are thousands of Barbadians who want to ensure that particularly matters, and this matter, as you know, 2014. And these matters which require conclusion have got to be brought to the House. So those persons who are anxious for general elections and who are walking around Barbados telling the government to call election now and abandon Parliament, they really misunderstand what is required for a government in office, particularly when it's operating within its parliamentary term. It is a cheap way of seeking to influence voters in relation to a general election. And it is a kind of approach, Mr. Speaker, that I certainly denounce. It is not an accurate picture of what is happening. And it is unfortunate that it's being used at this time. And I was saying to someone the other day who was raising with me some concerns about the actions of the opposition, I was saying to them that I recall from as early as 2008, we had not even graced government for 1 month. The members of the opposition were agitating for elections.
It's true.
They were agitating for elections since 2008. And I need to remind people of this because we have been the subject of agitation for elections continuously. Call elections now, since 2008. And it certainly does not connect to the fact that there are matters which have got to be completed, and that is why we are in this House, fulfilling our duties. And each and every one of the measures that we have been dealing with so far for today have been the subject of careful analysis and, Mr. Speaker, hard work by the public officers of Barbados, working in tandem with the ministers who have responsibility for these ministries. And I want to explain that because I know that persons who are listening to this debate need to get the explanation once and for all that we are not in here because as the opposition is seeking to run on calling programs, because one of the things that was being said today on the calling program was that we only rush in here to do do the reverse tax and take it back to the previous level because election is around the corner. And they probably could equally say that we only came in here now to complete this matter in relation to the amendment to the Income Tax Act to the benefit of those players in the tourism sector because there's election. So practically everything that has to be done, which have been part and parcel of the continuous work, not only of the political directorate, because much of this work has got to be done by public officers, highly technical people, the Chief Parliamentary Counsel. The Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel has got to be engaged each time that we are dealing with legislation. So when you are seeking now to point a political finger at the government, saying the government is only doing this because of election, then you are really seeking to point finger at the reputations and the careers and so on of many senior, highly qualified persons in the public service. In addition to that, those who also will have to be pointed at by the opposition are the various private sector partners without whom we could not have had this kind of legislation being brought to this House. So, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to make those few points in my support of this amendment to the Income Tax Act. I believe that this is one of those measures that certainly point to the fact that the government would have initially brought a measure to this House during the budgetary debate, but the government listened to the stakeholders and has come back now to the House with a consensus position which is engraved now in this bill, which suggests to me and should show that we have listened to our stakeholders and are prepared to come with measures that reflect that kind of consultation. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I am certainly very supportive of this amendment, and I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. Again, Mayor? Okay, yes.
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you very much. I want to thank as well the Honourable Minister of Tourism and the Honourable Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture for their interventions, which I think were absolutely appropriate in these circumstances. As you said, this is a matter that we are finalizing. There were some issues and challenges. The technical people who are responsible for executing have done their work. They have crossed their T's and dotted their I's, and they have returned to us and said now they believe that it is in a position that we can complete the process, and I'm happy to do so to the benefit of those who will receive the concessions, and also to the country, which will benefit, I think, handily from the increased direct tourism business in Barbados. And so with those words, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Honourable members, the question is that this bill be read a second time. Honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Committee?
Speaker, sir, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of the bill.
Seconder? Honourable members, the question is that I now leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Well, try to come back. I think two with them. There now. Two.
The House is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Beg to move so that clause 1 stand for.
Question that clause 1 stand for. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Beg to move, sir, that clause 2 stand for.
Is it?
Question is?
Question that clause 2 stand for. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
Seconder, please. Question is that I do not report His Honour the Speaker the passage of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
John.
Honourable members, this full sitting the House is resumed. Members, your chairman of committees has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
Honourable members, the question is that this bill be read a third time. Honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Value Added Tax Amendment Act 2018.
Honorable members, the question is that this bill be now passed and so cited. Honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Accordingly, this bill has now been passed and so cited.
Speaker, I beg to move that the sit-in be suspended until 4:15 this evening.
If I can second that, sir.
Honorable members, the question is that it be now suspended until 4:15. Honorable, that's supposed to be now suspended until 4:15. This is 4:15, right? Honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This House now stands suspended until 4:15.